last week, we agreed that silence is not called for, Simone told us this, when there is a need to take a stand and act. We also encourage silence when it would be beneficial to just listen, which often leads to, and I'm asking you to complete that sentence. Why do we listen to another? There are a variety of reasons. Anybody want to?
So you could learn.
To learn. Go ahead. That really sums it up, but anybody have something else?
When you listen to someone, you're giving them a little bit of kavod, you know?
It is a way of showing kavod if you're really engaged with what they're saying. And one more thing, maybe, when you say, when you say learn, what do you mean by learn? There are a couple of things you might learn. I don't mean specific subjects. Gloria?
Well, maybe they are expressing a point of view that you had never even thought of. At least it's worthwhile to hear them out. This is what they have to say. And then you can decide whether it's nonsense or it makes sense.
Absolutely. Something that you didn't even consider a possible, something that you would never have thought of it, you had never thought of it, and maybe that's a good way of looking at something. In fact, I had this experience with my 19-year-old niece, Hila, on Shabbat, where she was presenting something and I at first disagreed, but then she went on, and at the end of the day, I admitted to understanding and agreeing with what she was saying.
It gives you insight into the person you're listening to as well. It gives you more, not just on what they're saying, but who they are.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yes, absolutely. Okay, now, today, let's explore our openness to listening to any and everyone. And we'll do this by exploring a personality that some of us might be familiar with. If not through the Talmud or Pirkei Avot, through this book that's been around for a long time, Milton Steinberg's 1939 As a Driven Leaf.
Yes.
If you have not read this, you must. It is beautiful book, a beautiful book. And the character is the character we're focusing on today. Okay. Elisha, the son of Avua, would say, one who learns Torah in his childhood, what is this comparable to? To ink inscribed on fresh paper. And one who learns Torah in his old age, what is this comparable to? To ink inscribed on smudged paper. So first of all, why the difference in the papers? Read it to yourselves again once more. Why the difference between the papers, and what do you hear being said by Elisha? And please, people, remember, unmute yourself if you'd like to speak.
The child has a clean slate.
A child, a young child, is starting fresh, hasn't learned all that much, so it is clean. Yes, Merle, I think you said that. Yeah?
Yeah.
As opposed to the older person?
The person who's learning Torah in his old age is looking at a piece of paper that has handprints and fingerprints from all of those people who've studied what he is studying before him.
And what does that do?
It actually changes the composition of what he's seeing.
Can you explain that a little more?
Because you know what, I mean, if you.
You're right, but
You know what, if you're looking at something that people have looked at with different eyes and they've added to that fresh sheet that was started when a child was young, there are all kinds of different interpretations that now appear on that sheet.
and sometimes if you're looking to learn something new as an older person, continuing with what we just said before, it's hard to unlearn it.
True.
You know, if it's something that's wrong and that we have to unlearn, but that goes together with, are you prepared to forget something to understand something new, which is what I was describing with my niece. Yeah, you know, you get older, we're not as sharp, and I'm talking much older, much older, much older. I was given an extra 15 years today to get there. Okay.
It's like
Now-
you bring a different life experience to what you read. You can read the same thing over and over, and you have life experiences that affect what you understand from what you're reading.
Right.
Of course, that's why you can also go see a childhood movie like Alice in Wonderland when you're 5, and then see it when you're in your 30s and get something very different out of it. Just as many of the animated films, they're really, adults get a lot more out of it sometimes. Okay, now let's look at a few words here. One who learns Torah in his childhood. Now, translation, I've told you, is a funny thing. In the Hebrew, it says, Halomei Torah Yeled. Studies Torah Yeled. There is no in his childhood or as a childhood, which leaves for different potential commentaries on what that means. Because what could it mean if we say one who learns child? It could mean one of two things. It could mean he learns Torah when he's a child, and we know we're meant to begin as a child, or some commentaries have said, no matter what age you are, even the older person could learn as a child. But what does he mean by that? With the enthusiasm of a child who doesn't know something, so hopefully is enthusiastic about learning something new. And that's how it should be all our years of studying, that we are so enthusiastic about it, putting everything aside and want to learn. And there's a childlike spontaneity and enthusiasm.
But Bracha, it could also mean that someone who's learning child is learning in a childlike manner and is only skimming the surface of what he's seeing and not delving any further.
Okay,
Or-
which
or-
is a,
well,
go
the
ahead.
other way of- Yeah, it's me, Merle. The other way of looking at it is that a child has an open mind. We don't, as adults, have open minds necessarily when we come to a new subject or to a different perspective on a subject. We're often very close to new things.
Are you thinking of something specific now, Merle?
I'm thinking of a lot of things, a lot,
Okay.
not just one.
Okay. Well, as Marlene just said, somebody who lived many years before you, the Alter Rebbe of Kelm, said, indeed, it is good to be childlike, have that enthusiasm, but you have to mature. And what does he mean by that? That you cannot always look at oversimplified statements or characters in the Bible or in the Talmud as being oversimplified images, meaning very often, teachers will present, certainly to younger students, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. He's saying that is not what we are meant to do. It is not black and white, and that's why the Tanakh and the Talmud is such an incredible book. Because even the people that we are meant to be in awe of have their flaws. And it's something that we can relate to precisely for that. Or else we'd always say, there's no way I could aspire to be Rivka if she's perfect. No way. So yes, you're absolutely right. And that's going to be very necessary, that attitude of being open to not seeing somebody either entirely as bad or entirely good. Now that's difficult. And a lot of people don't have the security in their belief to be open to that. You know, he's got to be perfect. She's got to be perfect, or else she's not holy. And you're always going to be disappointed. You're always going to be disappointed. So let's understand who this Elisha is. He was, in the 2nd century, a student of Rabbi Akiva that we're all familiar with. He was a great thinker, Talmudic scholar, and a halachicist, but he defected. He became an apostate.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? He did, throughout his life, vacillate in his loyalties, torn by deep, unresolved conflicts. And he was ultimately abandoned by everyone. Not only abandoned, they dehumanized him by giving him a name that was not a name. They began calling him Acher. What does Acher mean?
The other.
The other. Now, we're supposed to be open to the other these days, but they saw him not just as the other, which is terrible, but alien to them. Zipporah, if you want to add a word, because I'm now, as I'm looking at you, reminded of the piece that you did, if you would briefly.
On the very end of the book that you just mentioned, as a driven leaf, he comes back, and the one student that had stayed with him all these years was encouraging him to come back into the Pardes again, into the world, and he knew he could never return. He had spent 40 years wandering in the Hellenistic world, trying to sort himself out, and when he wanted to return, he couldn't. And that one page, the second last page of the book, broke my heart. And so I did a painting about it with the circle of him leaving the circle covered with the talit of Rabbi Akiva and the other two, and traveling for 40 years in a wilderness, and then trying to return, but he could never go back. It was heartbreaking. It was written in 1934, I think, by Milton Steinberg, that book.
I think 39, somewhere around there. Yes, but you must read it.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the one person who did remain loyal to him and continued to see him as his teacher
Yes.
was a Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Meir wasn't just some simple student. Rabbi Meir is one of the Talmud's greatest. He is one of the most widely quoted sages. and considered a rebuilder of Jewish religious life after the devastating Roman suppression of the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And something else about, and this is all pertinent to our focus, Meir believed in reaching out to everyone and trying to bring them in to study, no matter what the social class, no matter what the family background. That was very, very important to him. And I think that's probably important background. He went to the extent that he's quoted as saying that an illegitimate person, a mamzer, who was a Torah scholar, because you could be a mamzer and a Torah scholar, should be given priority over a high priest that was an ignoramus. The name shouldn't do it all. Now, what brought on this disillusionment with this great Talmudic scholar? You know what, can you suggest what type of event or something would cause somebody to leave his observance and teaching? Not a right or wrong answer. What could you imagine would happen to bring that on? Anyone?
I think the prime factor would be disillusionment with God.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to give you 4 incidents of him losing this. This first text, there are different versions in the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud of this narrative. And whether one is more true than the other, it's often been said, doesn't matter, because it's the lessons that we glean from it that are what's important. So here we have the first. Elisha saw a person ascend a tree and take the mother bird together with her eggs, an act prohibited by the Torah, which requires that one first send away the mother bird before taking her eggs. I'm sure you've heard of this. The next day, he saw another person climb a tree, send away the mother bird, and take the eggs. On the way down, a snake bit him, and the man died. Elisha thought to himself, the Torah promises that one who sends away the mother bird will live long. It's one of 2 promises about long life. Yet, the man who acted in accordance with God's commandment had his life cut short, whereas the sinner was unharmed. So thus Elisha, as Marlene said, stopped believing in God. Second, 4 men entered into Pardes. Literally, this means orchard, but they were involved in studying mysticism. And these would be lofty, high heights that they would reach. Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher, and Rabbi Akiva. Acher, remember that's Elisha, or is it not Elisha? And we'll get back to that. Chopped down the orchard's growths. In other words, he became a heretic. The imagery is that he did not give himself to potential students. And because he encouraged them to leave studying, he was Some feel even murdering them. He became a heretic. What led him to heresy? This is another image. He saw the ministering angel, Mitaitran, sitting and writing the merits of Israel up in heaven. They had these visions. He said, there is a tradition that in the world above, that there is no sitting, no competition, no turning one's back before him, God, and no lethargy. So seeing that someone other than God was seated above, that made Elisha question. And he said, perhaps there are two authorities, and there is another source of power in control of the world, in addition to God. As Marlene said, this relates also to God. He's getting a very skewed picture of God based on these two experiences. Next, let's remember the time that he was living in. We've alluded to it already. The Roman period and the destruction that was going on. And he was one of the rabbis, and he was very close to Akiva and to the rabbis that were martyred. Shattered, burned ruins replaced the glory of the Jewish people, the house of God. Acher looks at the ruined Beit HaMikdash and concludes that there is another power, something even greater, which destroyed the temple. Because how could God have let that happen? He embraces that other power and seeks to align himself with the Romans, who now seem more powerful than the Jews. And we're going to get back to that, why power was an important thing to him. Is this not the lesson that his father always wanted him to learn? To follow the power, to align himself with the most powerful force he could find. When he sees the martyrdom of the great Torah sages, he aligns himself with the executioner. He chooses the ruthless murderer over the rabbi. The Jewish people, the destruction of the kingdom of God on earth. He turns away to the polar opposite in search of that greater power that he believes has overcome the God of Torah. So now we have 3 moments of him rejecting God. This next is related to this Roman scenario. Once he saw a pig dragging in its mouth the tongue of the famous sage Rabbi Yehuda. He became so disturbed at the sight that he exclaimed, "From this tongue, pearls of purest light used to come forth all his days. Is this Torah? And is this its reward?" God failed Yehuda as well. He doesn't get it. And he's not the only one. But I think we have categories of people. There are those who see the same that he sees, might question it, but it doesn't affect them to the degree that it affected him. There are those who are not at all bothered by these. They're set in their ways, as Merle said. Now, there's something else that we have to figure out about Elisha. Was he Elisha or, excuse the typo, Acher? Which one was he? because it got to the point where I think he didn't even know that he was both. So, how did he live his life? Acher. Why did he become a heretic? His mouth never stopped singing Greek music. They say about Acher that when he would stand up in the study hall, the Beit Midrash, many books of heresy would fall off his lap. So it's clear, it wasn't just that he was rejecting us, he was also learning from the world surrounding him. Something else about him. It's not just that he accepted the Romans. We're told that Acher joined the Romans and used his Torah knowledge to ensure that the Jews would publicly desecrate the Shabbat. Now, as we're going through all of this, I want you to be paying attention to how you're feeling about him, okay? Please. When the Jews found a loophole in the law, he taught the loophole to the hated Romans so they could erase Jewish identity and squash all hope of religious survival. So, for example, let's say they wanted someone to carry something, and you're not supposed to carry, and certainly not beyond the Eruv. So the loophole was that it was something that could be carried by one person, but you're not allowed. So they would carry that simple item to people, and that would be a way of getting around it. So Elisha let the Romans know that, so that they would tell them, no, 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 you can't do that. You've each got to do it on your own. Sometimes you'll see in a traditional neighborhood, people have a key as a piece of jewelry, so they're not carrying it, right, on Shabbat. Okay. It would come as no surprise to us to learn that the infamous Roman decree forbidding Shabbat observance was the work of Acher, the former Torah scholar. Elisha ben Avuya was the ultimate fall. From rabbi to executioner, from a teacher of great Torah scholars in their search for holiness, to teaching pagans who sought to extinguish holiness. Now, this is going to be very interesting. The same story, but the first is taken from the Talmud Bavli, and the second from the Jerusalem. And pay close attention to any differences, please. One Shabbat, Rabbi Meir was giving a lesson in the Beit Midrash. And his students who knew Elisha said to him, you know, Elisha's outside on a horse, and it's Shabbat. So Rabbi Meir had two options. He could have avoided him, told them, okay, sit down. He could have gone out there and rebuked him for coming so close to the Beit Midrash. Instead, he went for a walk with him. Elisha's on this horse, which he should not be if he's observing Shabbat, but he's not. But Rabbi Meir walks together with him. And Elisha has asked him what his sermon was about. And he's interested in hearing. Our rabbis taught once Acher was riding a horse on the Shabbat and Rabbi Meir was walking behind him to learn Torah from his mouth. Acher said to him, Meir, turn back. for I have already measured by the paces of my horse that the Shabbat limit extends only this far. You know that also not just carrying, but you're not supposed to walk beyond a certain limit.
Right.
So this apostate is reminding and is concerned about giving respect to his student. He knows that he would not want to make that mistake. So he, Rabbi Meir, replies, you too turn back. In other words, as Tzipora said, he was encouraging him. It's not too late. We're told it's never too late for anyone. Okay? So what does Acher answer? Have I not already told you that I have already heard from behind the veil, Jeremiah, return wayward children, except for Acher. Okay? Now, let's look at the second version from the Jerusalem Talmud. Acher said to him, enough, Meir, this is the Shabbat boundary. And Meir asked him, how do you know? Acher replied, I have measured 2,000 cubits based on the footprints of my horse. Rabbi Meir said, you have such wisdom and you don't want to return? Acher replied, I am unable. And Rabbi Meir asked, why? Acher replied, once on a Yom Kippur that fell out on Shabbos, I was riding a horse in front of the Holy of Holies. Now, why do you think he takes the time to point out that it wasn't just Yom Kippur, but Yom Kippur was on Shabbos? It was like he wanted to make it so clear. I did a double sin. And I heard a heavenly voice emerging from the Holy of Holies, return, my sons, except for Elisha ben Avuya, who knew my power yet rebelled against me. What is the difference, essential difference, between these two different versions of the same story? Did you catch it? Take a moment, look at it again. And if you read it with your lips, you'll hear it. Take a moment.
One, isn't the second one a more active exclusion? Like he's being told you can't come back in the second version? Like
Why?
God is rejecting him outright.
Okay, now, because here it actually says, from the Holy of Holies, I heard this. And he says, my sons, my power. So you're assuming that he's hearing it really explicitly from God. Why is that not so clear in the first one?
Behind the veil.
Behind the veil?
Yeah, and it's more, it seems like a more passive, like in other words, he's putting it into his own mind rather than
Okay.
an explicit rejection.
Okay, I like that. Anything else?
In the first one, he's actually coming through as a real anti-Semite in what he's doing. In this one, he's trying to help his student to not follow him.
I don't get that.
How do you get that?
Well, then in the first one, doesn't he enforces certain things, like he's I forget what he was doing, but anyways,
He was telling Rabbi Meir, his students, that you can't walk any further. You don't want to break Shabbos.
Yeah, in this one, he's
In
helping.
both of
But
them.
in the first one, he came through like a real anti-Semite.
No,
I don't know.
For the Romans.
no.
No. Here,
I missed that.
you're going back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were
Then he
comparing
talked about
those.
the Roman.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm in the wrong.
Okay, no, that's okay. Here, though, I can see why Merle is saying that it's not as explicit, but it really is saying that veil, that there is a voice that's saying it to him. But I'm looking for something much more concrete. And in each one, it's one word difference.
Well, one says except for Acher. What can you scroll down again to the bottom of the second one?
I can.
Oh.
I think you're on the right track.
One it says in the second one he says he rebelled against me, and in the first one he's just saying, I'm excluding you.
Now, I
To
thought
me,
you were going to say
anyway.
something different.
Different. Okay, I'm not
One
getting it.
word. It's a one word difference.
Wayward.
No,
No?
when Elisha is talking, in one case, he says,
Sabbath.
nope. Sarah, I see you studying that. Come on. It's how he refers. What does he hear? The voice. Who's the voice speaking to in the first case? And in the second case, everyone can repent.
One's behind the veil.
No, one is wayward children, and the other one says my sons.
Now, when Elisha is saying to Mayor why I feel I can't repent, I'm being told, I heard them say everyone, wayward children can repent except
Everybody but me.
Acher. And in the
Right.
second case,
Oh, except for me. Oh, yeah,
he's saying
against
everyone can except for
me.
Elisha.
Alicia.
name.
Okay, now why? Let's understand what the significance of that is.
Yeah.
Right.
Huh?
In the
It's-
first one, he's actually saying he is the heretic. In the second one, he still accepts being Alicia.
Effect, Shirley
Yeah.
Ann. Okay, his issue is he has already decided that he is full out Acher. And Acher, if he is to remain an Acher, is in a difficult situation. Meaning, he's going to have to, if he wants to be accepted to heaven, he's going to have to give. Right? If he stays as he is as Acher, then why should they make room for him? On the other hand, we're going to see that there is a debate. The angels don't want him up there, but the rabbis feel that he belongs up there. Now that's very important. Okay, so that's a real identity crisis. Have you totally lost Elisha? Except in the beginning, I said that he goes through life vacillating. Am I this? I mean, the fact that he still listens to Torah from his student, and the fact that he knows people are there and he comes by to the shul, to the Beit Midrash. You know, you can picture. I don't want to do that, but I like being in the environment. Okay.
No, Bracha, he didn't give himself the name Acher. It
No,
was
he didn't.
the
A
society,
prostitute gave him that name, actually.
and that
When
also makes a difference. It's not as if he said to himself, I'm Acher because I've chosen to go this path. He didn't do that. It's the others who turned away from him.
But but when he says that I hear him saying everybody repent except Acher, he relates to that as if that's him. He does relate to it as an him. No, when I say that a prostitute gave him that name, when he decided that he doesn't trust God anymore, he said, you know what? I'm not going to make it to Olam Haba. I might as well live life in a way that people who enjoy life do it. And he took himself to a prostitute who was shocked that he was there. Okay, so we get a picture of the things that he's been involved in. But we also see this ongoing relationship with Rabbi Meir, who I say is a great rabbi. And now we've got to look at it from Meir's point of view. Why is Meir still his student? And believe me, people were upset by it. They would see them communicating and they felt it was inappropriate. So what would he answer them? He would explain to them, and then they tell other people. The other sages said of him, and this is something positive, Rabbi Meir ate a half-ripe date and threw the peel away. What does that mean?
Sounds like he kept the good and got rid of the bad.
Yes. Who said that?
Brenda.
Okay, right on. Right on. That you have to know, we discussed this weeks ago with, I think it was with Micha Goodman's book, The Wandering Jew, about our history, our legacy, our treasures, you know, just because there might be material in there and thoughts that we don't think are particularly in line with our sensibilities today, that doesn't mean you throw it all out. So Meir had decided there's too much good in this apostate. Maybe similar to the Rasha at our Pesach Seder. You think about that. You have a few months. Or at the Seder next year, you can read a driven leaf to everybody. Go around the table and have, because they'll find that very interesting.
Bracha. I was thinking about Rabbi David Hartman's book some years ago, where he was wrestling with a decision that he had to make about a couple in his synagogue who wanted to get married. And this decision was that one was a Kohen and the bride was a convert. And he wasn't allowed halachically to perform that ceremony. And it ruined his life and the couple's life because he agonized over that decision as to how that would affect this couple. Eventually, of course, later on, he changed his viewpoint and said that he had to marry. These people were Jewish. That was in another time, that halachic decision, and he would marry people like that. I just thought I'd mention that as an example.
Absolutely. Thank you. Somebody else?
I was just about to remind people that As a Driven Leaf is considered a novel. It's based on the texts historically, but it is in novel fiction.
Oh yes, beautifully written.
Gorgeously written, no question, but it is not considered the definitive book on Elisha ben Abuya, but it really gives a picture of who he was and what he went through, no question. And Rabbi Meir shines in the book as his student, his faithful, through it all, his faithful student over the years. But it is considered a novel.
Now we're about to find out, thank you, what might have been the powerful force stimulating Rabbi Meir to be this type of person. He is quoted this from Sefer Tehillim, Psalms. May sin cease from the land. Sin, but not sinner. At one point, Rabbi Meir, this has nothing to do with Elisha, Rabbi Meir is very angry with someone for having behaved very improperly and really wants to do away with him. And someone reminds him of this line that is meant to guide us. We want to get rid of evil. We're not looking to get rid of the evil person. Yes, we might want him put away, but it's evil we're looking to get rid of. Who told him that? Who quoted this to him, needing to stop him from doing something that he would regret? Anybody?
Alicia?
It's
Not
Alicia.
Alicia, not Alicia, a woman.
Oh. His wife, Alicia's
His wife. No, Mayor's wife. You
Mayor.
must know Rabbi Meir's wife is also considered a scholar and quoted often in the Talmud, Bruria.
Bruria. Oh, right. I forgot.
Bruria. So I thought we should be aware of that she was behind his openness. Now, interesting, just to bring you one of the teachings of Rabbi Meir from Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Meir would say, busy yourself with Torah. Be humble before every man. If you neglect the Torah, there will be many more causes for neglect before you. If you toil much in Torah, there is much reward to give to you. Can you relate any of that to his relationship with his teacher, an apostate, Elisha? Is anything in their relationship reflected in this Mishnah?
Bracha, would you say that Rabbi Meir actually never gave up that Elisha ben Abuya was immersed in Torah even when he was going through what he went through for 40 years? The question.
Yep.
That's the same thing.
Yep. So he wasn't part of the community, but he was a constant thinker, and we see that he did some horrific things. But do we not know people who go through periods of time because they are conflicted? Now, listen to what Elisha says about his father, because Elisha, in explaining why this had to end up the way it did, he believes that it was all determined. What do I mean? It happened with my father Avuya, who was one of the great men of Yerushalayim. On the day of my circumcision, he invited all the eminent men of Yerushalayim to sit in one room. And Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua sat separately in another room. His family was rich and they were not really into studying, but he invited the rabbis anyway. After the assembled dignitaries had eaten and drunk, some recited songs and others alphabetical acrostics. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yoshua, "They are occupied with what interests them, so shall we not occupy ourselves with what interests us?" They began with subjects connected with the Torah, then with the prophets, and after that with the scriptures. The words were as joyful as when they were given from Sinai, and fire surrounded them, for were they not originally delivered from Sinai with fire? As it said, the mountain burned with fire into the heart of heaven. My father thereupon remarked, since the might of the Torah is so great, should this child survive I will dedicate him to the Torah, because his intention, Elisha says, was not for the name of heaven. My study of the Torah did not endure with me. Meaning what he said is, he saw these two men studying and looking so powerful that he said, I want my son to have that. It wasn't for the sake of knowing Torah, but that he'll grow to be powerful like that. Now, that's not a reason to study Torah, and so Elisha says, that's the reason why it turned out the way it did. And that's why God told me that I'm not welcome, because God knew that my beginning was not for holy purposes. It was because I wanted to listen to my father, who wanted me to have the same power as the rabbis. So,
But
he understands-
Bracha, he may not have had a choice as to whether to listen to his father or not.
oh, for sure.
And the fact that he did not choose this path for himself made it a much weaker path than it would have had it been a journey he started on himself.
Absolutely. What we're seeing here is everything in the beginning influences, no matter how old you are. It's absolutely, absolutely. So now the question is, but then as he got into it, he did become a great, but then he fell out. And he believes that God is telling him when he says, you're not welcome. Does God really mean that? But he thinks that God wants him to prove that he really wants to get back into it for the right reason. So if God tells him, okay, you can come back, it might be just because he wants to get back into the powerful position. So if God tells him, no, you can't come back, but he does come back, knowing that he's lost this high position, it means he's studying for the right reason. Now, just another indication that God actually preferred the opinion of the rabbis over the angels. And this is an example. Sometime later, Elisha's daughters came to receive charity from Rebbe. He decreed, he shall not receive grace, nor shall there be pity for his orphans, referring to Elisha, referring to this pasuk in Tehillim that it can be applied there. The girls, his daughters, said, Rebbe, do not look on his deeds, look on his Torah learning. Now that's an interesting notion also. Because of his incredible Torah learning, don't pay attention to his deeds. There should be enough credit on that. At that moment, this version says it like this: at that moment, a bat call, a voice from God comes and broke into weeping and decreed that they should receive support. That's a way of saying, we're not throwing you out and we're not throwing out your father. An interesting tale. Now, somebody could ask or say, look how we began. We began with a teaching of Elisha's. Couldn't they have not included him in this text? Decided he's not worthy. So think about that. And I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, maybe he wrote it before he changed his mind about life. Because they still could have deleted it, but they didn't. They didn't. And what would be a reason for that? Because he has so much to teach, but something a little beyond that. Anybody?
Because there are times when you can learn from a bad example as much as you learn from a good example. In other words, the lesson may look negative, but it teaches what you can do positively.
Okay, absolutely. That there's something to learn from the bad that he did. So don't do that.
And you're learning that no one's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, no one is.
And
No one-
I think that's why Rabbi Meir continued to study with him
Mhm.
and saw him as a teacher, because even though he was doing things that were negative, they showed Rabbi Meir a different way to approach life.
Yep. And used maturity of knowing that life and no human being is without complex. So these next two, which we'll just read, they really speak to this discussion, who we listen to, who we can still learn from. Now, we don't go overboard. You know, obviously there are certain people that I'm not going to look to be my teacher. On the other hand, I'm sure I've learned already of teachers that there's something I have to gain from them. And it's a matter of realizing that life is so complicated. And we have to be so careful up to a point of not judging. Ben Azai would also say, do not scorn any man and do not discount anything. For there is no man who has not his hour, good or bad, and no thing that has not its place. And furthermore, Rabbi Yishmael would also say, do not judge on your own, for there is none qualified to judge alone, only the one. And do not say you must accept my view, for this is the majority's right, not yours. And that is an invitation to listening to other judges' opinions and being on a tribunal. And certainly that happens with difficult cases and serious cases, murder cases. You listen to somebody else. Ultimately, maybe you won't agree, but at least you've listened and you've let yourself be open to others. I want to close. We were talking in the very beginning about studying, learning as a child. When you were a child or as a child. And in a comment on this, the Rebbe of Babov was conversing with a group of Hasidim when someone mentioned that this was a special day that warranted a bit of celebration. They agreed that they should have some refreshments and looked around for whom they might send to get them. Why don't you give me the money, the rabbi said, and I will send my boy. They did so. And after a lengthy interval, the rabbi returned, having gone himself for the refreshments. The embarrassed Hasidim said, we thought you were going to send your boy. I did, the rabbi said. As I grew older, I decided I would never abandon my youth, and I brought my boy along with me to my old age.
Fantastic.
It's
Beautiful.
just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. So, okay. I will miss you again for a few weeks as we, please God, go up north as long as things stay the way they are at the moment. And Belle and Isaac, our hearts go out to you. But when I commented to Belle the other day how hope she's coping, she answered, as she always does, with the words, Ain Brera. See, somebody knew that, Belle. That I think Simone just said it. Ain Brera. And that's what keeps you guys going. You'll dance, you'll sing, you'll do a Zoom. And we'll dance here too. Okay?
Bracha,
Yes.
I wanted to mention that As a Driven Leaf was required reading at Beth Tikva by a great Rabbi Fader many years ago. And that left me, I bought that book and I read it a couple of times, but it was required reading.
Yes. Yes. In my household too.
Driven leaf.
As a driven leaf. As a driven leaf. Really, I'm glad you pointed that out. It's definitely a novel, not a documentary. Beautiful book. You'll read it in 1 or 2 sittings.
There's enough in it to glean about Elisha that is true. He based it on truth. Milton, what was his name? Milton
Steinberg.
Steinberg.
Yeah,
Milton Steinberg.
it was great.
Okay. All right.
Thanks,
So,
Brock.
be
Thank
well.
you.